I spent an entire day with the legend Matt Stuart at one of his workshops in Lisbon, and it changed how I think about my images, as well as making me think more about how I can be a better photographer, which was so unsurprising. Matt has been shooting street photography for over 20 years, taking some of London and the world's best street photography images. And some of the lessons that I took away would have taken me years to discover by myself, if ever. And so I am so grateful to have spent some time with him, to be able to ask him questions and to learn from a modern day great. And now that it's been a few months since that initial session, here are the most impactful lessons that have stayed with me that I hope will help you out too. We're going to work our way from impactful ideas to concepts that absolutely changed the game for me and allowed me to really find my own style. So stick around and find out why we want a tanned neck. Hear me out on this one. I promise you it is related to street photography. Have you ever wondered why the Secret Service and bodyguards always wear sunglasses? Humans communicate so much with our eyes, and it's thought that we have more whites in our eyes than, I guess, other animals, to make it easier for other people to see where we are looking. And this is fantastic for hunting and needing to silently stalk our prey, right? But why is sunglasses not helpful for street photography? You see, when we wear sunglasses, we are concealing, or at least making it harder for others to understand our intentions. And when photographing people in the street, we want to make it abundantly clear what we're up to, because what we're doing is pretty weird. We are walking around taking photos of strangers because we want to, because we find that interesting, because we find that fun. That's quite weird, right? But by keeping our faces and our expressions open, we can help potential subjects feel at ease and understand that we aren't doing any harm, and therefore reduces our likelihood of having those difficult confrontations that aren't exactly fun to deal with. I cannot tell you how many of my best images have come from implementing this idea, because more often than not, we'll see someone do something a little weird and then they'll stop and we'll go, huh, that was weird, and then realize what we're trying to do and think, oh, why didn't I take that photo, and then just continue on with our day, right? But that is where we go wrong, because if someone does something once, they're more likely to do it again. Someone who is stretching up against a pole is more likely to stretch again against the same pole than for someone else to do something weird or interesting nearby. And so if you notice an interesting gesture, pause, prepare your camera, slow down, and get ready for it to happen again so you can get that photo that you imagined in your head. And generally, the more interesting the gesture, the more patience we should observe, so we can hopefully get that special image. And so trust in the process. So imagine two images with exactly the same subjects, moment, and camera settings. One image is taken with a beautiful complementary background, and the other is busy and distracting and horrible. We'd prefer the first one, right? Yet, how often do we consider the background of our images? Many of us don't really pay too much attention to it, right? Myself included. And it's easy to think, okay, let me just use a low f-stop and blur the background. Problem solved, right? And whilst yes, that is one answer to the problem, we are likely overlooking opportunities to make our photos even better by incorporating the background in our images. Because it's important for us to consider how we can get the environment, the background, and the additional context to add to our images, so we can start to compare and contrast between our subject and the environment. We're going to get onto the background more in the next section, but before we get there, do not twist that point. Do not add resistance to your photography. If the background is poor, but the moment is good, take the photo. Practice the art of capturing moments, and then in post, when we're sat at home and we have all the time in the world, we can then consider how we could have made the photo better. Always, always, always take the photo, even if you think the background's meh. And there's a video on up here to show you the best ways that I recommend doing this. Okay, so how do we consider the backgrounds? The biggest background killer is the unrelated brands or random text in our images. And they are so distracting that our attention quickly gets pulled away from the moment that the photographer is trying to capture towards other elements that are distracting in the frame. And that's because businesses spend so much cash creating eye-catching logos and adverts that create feelings around their brands. Let's just say that you include McDonald's branding in your images. We automatically start thinking about what McDonald's means to us and projecting ideas onto that image, whereabouts you are, the context, who might be around, all of that. And think about how differently we would consider an image of a fight happening on a beach versus outside McDonald's. And not only that, design trends influence brands and text, which ultimately dates our images. And in some contexts, that's great. Because I don't know about you, but I want to capture what it's like to live in the age of the selfie stick. In other contexts, creating an image that feels timeless means that our viewer is intrigued about when it was taken. And they may even feel a greater connection to this story because it doesn't feel like they're looking into the past. Matt's photos are iconic for feeling immersive and interesting everywhere you look. One way that he does this is by filling the frame with interesting subjects, and the other is by creating depth. So how does he do that? Because images are 2D, right? So how can he make them feel 3D? We can create 3D by strategically placing visual elements at different distances within our frame, usually forming layers in front and behind of our main subject. The layer in front of the subject often creates an immersive or a more immersive sense of depth, while the layer behind, as we mentioned before, adds the environmental context. And plus, it makes the images feel like there is something interesting all around our frame. Although being a pale as fuck person comes in handy when trying to act like a human reflector on set, we actually want the backs of our necks to be lovely and crispy. And whilst the tan itself is a lovely byproduct, it's the process of achieving it which is what matters. You see, Matt recommends shooting into the shadow so that our subjects are front lit by the sun, meaning that we want to be walking away from the sun, and thankfully that means that we won't be needing our sunglasses. So why do we want to do this? The goal is to create contrast between our brightly lit subjects and then the dark shadowy background, thus drawing the viewer's eye directly to where we want them. And as our subjects are fully illuminated, we get to see exactly what they're up to and why they might have been interesting to the photographer. And you see, this solves a lot of problems that have been created by some of the earlier ideas. In street photography, often timing is everything, and this is going to be controversial, but autofocus can be slower than manual focus. We've got to lift our camera, and then to make sure that our little focus area is on our subject, for the camera to then focus and pick them up, to then take the photo. Whereas with manual focus, we can set a rough distance that you ideally want your subject to be at. You then slap the aperture up to f16 and boom, the subject is in focus and we can release the shutter exactly when we want to. And whilst we will definitely lose any sense of depth of field, we now have the ability to separate our subjects using contrast and to have greater flexibility to create in-focus layers of subjects, making our photos ultimately more interesting. Personally, I have found it hugely beneficial to invest in my learning because at the end of the day, our skills are what separates us as photographers and I guess in everything that we do in life. So if you want to go on one of Matt's workshops, I'd highly recommend it. Follow him on Instagram because he shares all of the details over there. And on that note, see you in the street.